Hi, my name is So-Jung. I'm from Michigan State University, and I'll be talking about cultural ecosystem services of inland fisheries, specifically focusing on the lake whitefish in the upper Laurentian Great Lakes. So why talk about inland fish? Inland fish provide a lot of ecosystem services to people. The ones that we talk about a lot, the most are food, nutrition, and livelihoods to people throughout the world, particularly in the global south. They provide a lot of nutrients, especially to children, things like calcium, protein, depending on the fish, omega-3 fatty acids that are really important to healthy development and growth. They're also an important source of livelihoods. A lot of times this won't be necessarily as full-time jobs, but people who are bringing additional income into their household for their families, and not just through the harvesting of fish, but also through processing, marketing, and other industries associated with fishing. So things like creating the gear that's used for fishing, creating other supplies used in the fisheries industry. So there's a lot of jobs connected with that, and it is an important source of economic security for people throughout the world. Despite the numerous ecosystem services that inland fisheries provide to people, these benefits are often overlooked when developing natural resource or economic development policies. And a lot of the times, this is because those benefits aren't really well identified or well quantified. So it's really to kind of overlook, especially in a formal sense, how important inland fisheries are to a lot of human communities. And not just the food or the economic benefits, but inland fisheries provide a lot of cultural ecosystem services to people. So for this talk, I'm going to define cultural ecosystem services as the non-material benefits people obtain from nature. So those are things like the way that fish contribute to people's heritage, people's spiritual senses, people's sense of aesthetics, or just mental health. So the benefits that you get from looking at a fish in your local pond, the benefits that you get from being out in nature and seeing the things around you. So I think everybody will agree that these are really important ecosystem services, but they're very difficult to identify and to quantify. And part of that is because it's really hard to put a value on what is the value to you of there being fish in your local pond. And it's also difficult to identify and quantify because they're often intertwined with other ecosystem services. So for example, people go fishing recreationally for all sorts of different reasons. And they might tell you it's because they enjoy being outside, they enjoy eating the fish that they catch. But there's all sorts of other reasons intertwined with that people might not necessarily think about consciously. And again, in a lot of discourse, fisheries are often thought of as primarily fulfilling food or economic needs, rather than the more cultural ecosystem services that fish provide. So to talk about these cultural ecosystem services provided by inland fisheries, I'm going to be focusing on lake whitefish in the Laurentian Great Lakes. So Laurentian Great Lakes are on the border between Canada and the US, and specifically I'm going to focus on the upper Great Lakes, which are Lakes Michigan, Huron, and Superior. The lake whitefish are historically important to communities in this region. They're considered a first food by Anishinaabe communities in the region. Additionally, the abundance and easy ability to harvest lake whitefish really contributed to European settlement of the region and was one of the industries that helped spur settlement and development of the Great Lakes. However, lake whitefish harvests have been decreasing over the past 50 years. A lot of that is due to changing habitats in the Great Lakes and also negative interactions with invasive species, particularly dry-sinded mussels and sea lamprey. So these changes haven't really been great for lake whitefish, and the abundance of lake whitefish in the Laurentian Great Lakes has been steadily decreasing. And this decreasing abundance has had impacts on the commercial fisheries. So like I mentioned, the commercial fisheries for lake whitefish were a really important part of the development and the fabric of Great Lakes communities. But recently, for a lot of different reasons, it's become much harder for these commercial fisheries to remain viable. And fishers have adapted to that in a number of different ways. Things like changing how many people are involved in the fishery, what the supply chain of the fishery looks like, trying to create new products, not just fish fillets, but things like whitefish dips, smoked whitefish, as well as reaching out to new markets, they're all trying to increase the viability of this livelihood that many of them have been involved in for their lives and for multiple generations of their families. So instead of just the food and economic values that this commercial fishery provides, I really want to focus on the cultural values. So, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the commercial fishing families are multi-generational fishing families. So while it is their livelihood, the commercial fishing is really a part of their family's identity. And a lot of times it's part of the identity of the communities that they live in. And you can see that for the town names, a lot of them are named things like Whitefish Point, kind of reflecting the importance of whitefish and the commercial fishery to these towns. There's also a value in having these historical commercial fisheries still remaining and still an active part of the Great Lakes. In terms of tourism and contributing to a sense of place, a lot of people go up north in Michigan to kind of see what these communities are like, and also because eating lake whitefish during the summer is a part of the tourism and a part of what they're looking for when they're going to these areas. So in kind of these ways, lake whitefish contribute to what people are looking for into the tourist experience in these Great Lakes coastal communities. Additionally, because lake whitefish are a native species to the Great Lakes region, there is a cultural value and very difficult to measure value of having this native species remaining in the Great Lakes and being an active and thriving part of the ecosystem. So a lot of these, from a lot of different angles, are the cultural values that we associate with lake whitefish. So thank you for listening to my presentation. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation. So-Jung, I'd like to open up now for questions. Also forgot to say to include your questions that you have for the ACES Fellows from before. Okay, so let me go to the questions. So Jung, I have a question here for you. Is this research applicable in other areas?
I think it's applicable in the sense that for a lot of areas, fisheries are primarily thought of in terms of the more of the extractive values, so the food and the livelihood aspect. But there are a lot of cultural connections that fish have to people in their daily lives, and those are important reasons for people in conserving fish resources. So I think it is applicable in that sense of trying to work out how do you identify what how do you identify what these cultural values can be, and then where do you go after that?
Okay, Shantae's having a little bit of trouble, so let me jump into the next question. Thank you for that, So-Jung Youn. So the next question is, what do you see the next direction of your research? Continuing with what you're doing, or is there another angle you'd like to take?
So with this research specifically, right now, it's very preliminary of just trying to identify what are these cultural values, and then really looking at not just in fisheries, but in a lot of different fields, what methods have been developed to kind of value some of these cultural ecosystem services that fish have, and then how do we apply them so that we can go to policymakers and say, hey, have you considered this aspect of fish and how important they are? So that would be the next step for us.
Great, thank you so much for your presentation.
Mm-hmm.